Hello everyone, back again with a plot recap. Today I'm going to recap a horror film from 2022 called Barbarian. The film opens on a stormy night. Tess Marshall arrives at an Airbnb that she booked at 467 Barbary Street, but as she tries to check in, she cannot find the house key or get in touch with whoever booked her. Before she leaves, she sees a light turn on in the house, and she rings the bell. A man named Keith Toshko answers, and he says he booked the house as well. Since they cannot reach the bookers, Keith invites Tess to stay while they try to get things sorted. Tess is unable to book a hotel anywhere else, so she takes a shower and is invited by Keith to share a bottle of wine. She explains that she is meeting with a filmmaker named Bonnie Zane for a job interview. Keith says he has seen her last film, despite Tess thinking nobody else would have seen it. They bond for a bit before going to bed. During the night, Tess wakes up to overhear Keith gasping in his sleep, likely due to night terrors. She tries to wake him up but ends up startling both of them. Keith denies anything is wrong. The next day, Tess goes for her interview. As she steps outside, she is surprised to see that all the other houses surrounding the Airbnb seem abandoned and dilapidated. Tess then goes to meet Bonnie at the restaurant. Everything goes well until Tess mentions where she is staying, and Bonnie warns her to get out of there quickly. When Tess returns to the house, a man named Andre runs after her and tells her to get out of the house. Although a bit spooked, Tess goes about her business and ends up going down toward the basement. The door locks behind her, and she has left her phone on the kitchen table. She then finds a rope attached to the wall and finds a secret entrance to a tunnel.
Nope.
Despite some initial hesitance, Tess goes into the tunnel for a little bit. She comes across a room with a bed, a camera, and a bloody handprint on the wall, as well as a staircase going further down, causing her to freak out. She runs back to the basement and sees Keith outside, so she gets him to help get her out. Tess explains to Keith what she saw and says they need to get out of there. Keith tries to reassure her that there is nothing serious down there, so he goes to check it out. After a while, Tess goes looking for Keith, and she walks down the staircase. She hears Keith screaming and calling for help. Tess finds him in the tunnel, and he says something bit him. Before they can run, a horrifying naked humanoid monstrosity appears and smashes Keith's head until he is dead before she roars at Tess. The next scene shows AJ Gilbride, a successful Hollywood actor, who suddenly receives a phone call from his colleagues. They tell him he's been fired from his most recent show because of an alleged sexual misconduct against a co-star. With his career threatened, he flies off to Detroit to liquidate an asset of his, so that he could afford a lawyer for his ongoing lawsuit. AJ travels to a rental property he owns in Detroit, and just so happens, the asset is the very house in Brightmoor. Upon his arrival, he can see that Tess' car is still in front of the house, and her belongings along with Keith's are scattered around the house. This infuriates AJ, who immediately thinks someone's been squatting at his place. He tries calling up his house manager, but she claims that there hasn't been any new Airbnb bookings in the past 2 weeks. Ignoring this for now, he goes out to meet up with a friend in town. And here we learn that AJ really did rape his co-star, but refuses to admit that it was rape. On the next morning, he starts digging around Keith and Tess's things, as he is curious about their identities. He then finds Tess' laptop and sees her username, and later finds her car keys on the small dining table. This leaves one last place to look for the squatters in the basement. He gets dressed and arms himself with a small knife and a flashlight. When he enters the basement, he suddenly hears a loud thump coming from one side of the wall. He also discovers the sticking out rope and opens the hidden door. But because AJ is not the brightest, he doesn't find the room with the bed and camera alarming. He instead sees this as an opportunity to increase his property value. Because more space means more money, he takes a measuring tape and starts measuring the size of the dark hall in the sketchy room. He gets even more ecstatic when he discovers the other hidden door leading further underground, and starts measuring as he descends. AJ doesn't even get scared at the sight of the cages instead. He keeps going until he finds some light shining from further down the tunnel. Upon walking up to it, he discovers a foul-smelling room with a small TV playing an old tutorial on how to nurse a baby. And then suddenly, he feels a tug on his measuring tape, and decides to let it go. Hearing a scary noise makes him run deeper down the tunnel in fear. It is at this point that the creature appears in front of his face. Terrified, AJ keeps running until he falls down a hole, right when he finds Tess is in there with him. The next scene takes us to sometime in the 80s where the house's original owner, Frank, is leaving his home. When he climbs into his car, we can see that the street is still full of residents. He heads to the grocery store, and tells the employee he's looking for baby needs because he's expecting a newborn. But when he returns to his car, we can tell that there's something wrong with Frank, as he starts following a lady's car, and watches her when she gets home. Up next, he disguises himself as a city electrician coming in to check for potential power outages. But when he gets inside her house, He proceeds to unlock her bathroom window before heading home. His neighbor approaches him as he pulls up, announcing that a lot of people are selling their properties as the city's expecting an economic crash. But Frank confidently says he's not moving anywhere. When he gets back inside the house and opens the basement door, a lady's agonizing scream can be heard. Back in the present, Tess tells AJ to be quiet and calm down. The mother then lowers a baby bottle down into the pit, which Tess drinks from, but AJ is less willing. The mother enters the pit and treats Tess like her child, but she growls and screeches toward AJ. Tess and AJ manage to climb out of the pit and begin to make their way out, but AJ is left behind and trapped in a room where the mother forces him to breastfeed off her. Tess manages to break the window to the basement and is pulled out by Andre before the mother can reach her. Andre tries to take Tess to safety, but she insists on going back to free AJ. As it turns out, the homeless people around the neighborhood already knew about the creature in the house, and he was the guy from the earlier scene. According to the homeless man, the creature comes out at night, and will look for Tess, so she must run away now. Plus, the creature is not alone in that basement. Meanwhile, AJ is now venturing down the tunnels, when he discovers a bell and a power line, so he decides to follow it. He discovers a room with a very old man inside, who is none other than Frank. Back on the surface, Tess has made it all the way to a nearby gas station, and borrowed the shopkeeper's phone to call 911. But when the police arrive, they look down on her, and think she's a drug addict, so she convinces them to come to the house to save AJ. But upon arriving, the officers are skeptical about Tess's claims, and think she's just another delirious homeless person. So they drive away. While this is going on, Frank gestures for AJ to fetch him his bedside drawer, so AJ does. Afterwards, AJ discovers a series of tape recordings labeled with various women's names, so he decides to play one. As it turns out, it contains a recording of a woman getting raped. Infuriated, AJ starts yelling at Frank, until Frank pulls out a gun from the drawer, and suddenly shoots himself. Meanwhile upstairs, Tess breaks the house's window, and goes inside to fetch her car keys. But when she manages to get inside the car and starts the engine, the mother steps out, prompting her to drive towards it, ramming her into the wall until she seemingly passes out. Afterwards, she heads downstairs to fetch AJ, while at the same time, AJ takes Frank's gun to arm himself, and starts venturing back out in the tunnels. Unfortunately, AJ mistakenly shoots Tess on the waist. He then helps her get up, and they frantically exit the house. But to their surprise, the creature is no longer stuck to the car, as Tess's car is done for, while AJ's car keys are somewhere in the tunnels. Tess leads them to where the homeless man lives to find shelter. Here the homeless man explains to them that the original house owner, aka Frank, was a serial rapist who would hold women hostage, and rape them until they make babies. He then would get the babies to procreate with one another, and after generations of incest, the mother is the final product, who's been in the house for over 40 years. The man also convinces them that they're safe, as the creature never steps this far out of the house, but he may have spoken too soon, because the mother suddenly appears, and tears the homeless man's limbs apart. Tess and AJ run for safety and make their way up a water tower. AJ drops the gun just as the mother starts catching up to them. AJ thinks he can redeem himself and save both of them, so he grabs Tess and throws her off the tower, knowing the mother will instinctively go after her baby. AJ runs down and sees the mother seemingly dead. Just as he tries to justify his actions to Tess, the mother springs back up and gouges AJ's eyes out with her thumbs before cracking his head in two. The mother then crawls over to nurture Tess, who grabs the gun. She has a slight look of remorse on her face before she pulls the trigger. Tess then gets up and walks out of the area to get medical attention.